entrance came into view, a crystalline maze of low bubble-like structures glinting in the red sunshine. But this was only its surface aspect. Loy Chuck's people had built their homes mostly underground since the beginning of their foggy evolution. Besides, in this latter day the nights were very cold. The shelter of subterranean passages and rooms was welcome. The mummy was taken to Loy Chuck's laboratory, a short distance below the surface. Here at once the scientist began his work. The body of the ancient man was put in a large vat. Fluids submerged it, slowly soaking from that hardened flesh the alkali that had preserved it for so long. The fluid was changed often, until woody muscles and other tissues became pliable once more. Then the more delicate process began. Still submerged in liquid, the corpse was submitted to a flow of restorative energy passing between complicated electrodes. The cells of antique flesh and brain gradually took on a chemical composition nearer to that of the life that they had once known. At last the final liquid was drained away, and the mummy lay there, a mummy no more, but a pale, silent figure in its tatters of clothing. Loy Chuck put an odd metal fabric helmet on its head, and a second, much smaller helmet on his own. Connected with this arrangement was a black box of many uses. For hours he worked with his apparatus, studying and guiding the recording instruments. The time passed swiftly. At last, eager and ready for whatever might happen now, Loy Chuck pushed another switch. With a cold, rosy flare, energy blazed around that moveless form. For Ned Vince, timeless eternity ended like a gradual fading mist. When he could see clearly again, he experienced that inevitable shock of vast change around him. Though it had been dehydrated, his brain had been kept perfectly intact through the ages, and now it was restored. So his memories were as vivid as yesterday. Yet through that crystalline vat in which he lay, he could see a broad, low room in which he could barely have stood erect. He saw instruments and equipment whose weird shapes suggested alienness and knowledge beyond the era he had known. The walls were lavender and phosphorescent. Fossil bone fragments were mounted in shallow cases. Dinosaur bones, some of them seemed, from their size. But there was a complete skeleton of a dog, too, and the skeleton of a man, and a second man skeleton that was not quite human. Its neck vertebrae were very thick and solid, its shoulders were wide, and its skull was gigantic. All this weirdness had a violent effect on Ned Vince, a sudden nostalgic panic. Something was fearfully wrong. The nervous terror of the unknown was on him. Feeble and dizzy after his weird resurrection, which he could not understand, remembering as he did that moment of sinking to certain death in the pool at Pit Bend, he caught the edge of the transparent vat and pulled himself to a sitting posture. There was a muffled murmur around him, as of some vast unearthly metropolis. "Take it easy, Ned Vince." The words themselves and the way they were assembled were old, familiar friends, but the tone was wrong. It was high, shrill, parrot-like, and mechanical. Ned's gaze searched for the source of the voice, located the black box just outside of his crystal vat. From that box the voice seemed to have originated. Before it crouched a small brownish animal with a bulging head. The animal's tiny fingered paws, hands they were really, were touching rows of keys. To Ned Vince it was all utterly insane and incomprehensible. A rodent looking like a prairie dog, a little, but plainly possessing a high order of intelligence, and a voice whose soothingly familiar words were more repugnant somehow, simply because they could never belong in a place as eerie as this. Ned Vince did not know how Loy Chuck had probed his brain with the aid of a pair of helmets and the black box apparatus. He did not know that in the latter his language, taken from his own revitalized mind, was recorded, and that Loy Chuck had only to press certain buttons to make the instrument express his thoughts in common, long-dead English. Loy, whose vocal organs were not human, would have had great difficulty speaking English words anyway. Ned's dark hair was wildly awry. His gaunt young face held befuddled terror. He gasped in the thin atmosphere. "I've gone nuts," he pronounced with a curious calm. "Stark, staring nuts." Loy's box, with its recorded English words and its sonic detectors, could translate for its master too. As the man spoke, Loy read the illuminated symbols in his own language, flashed on a frosted crystal plate before him. Thus he knew what Ned Vince was saying. Loychuk pressed more keys, and the box reproduced his answer. No, Ned, not nuts. Not a bit of it. There are just a lot of things that you've got to get used to, that's all. You drowned about 1,000,000 years ago. I discovered your body. I brought you back to life. We have science that can do that. I'm Loychuk. It took only a moment for the box to tell the full story in clear, bold, friendly terms. Thus Loy sought with calm human logic to make his charge feel at home. Probably, though, he was a fool to suppose that he could succeed thus. Vince started to mutter, struggling desperately to reason it out. "A prairie dog," he said, "speaking to me 1,000,000 years. Evolution. The scientists say that people grew up from fishes in the sea. Prairie dogs are smart, so maybe super prairie dogs could come from them. A lot easier than men from fish." It was all sound logic. Even Ned Vince knew that. Still, his mind, tuned to ordinary simple things, couldn't quite realize all the vast things that had happened to himself and to the world. The scope of it all was too staggeringly big. 1,000,000 years. God! Ned Vince made a last effort to control himself. His knuckles tightened on the edge of the vat. "I don't know what you've been talking about," he grated wildly, "but I want to get out of here. I want to go back where I came from. Do you understand, whoever or whatever you are?" Loychuk pressed more keys. "But you can't go back to the 20th century," said the box. "Nor is there any better place for you to be now than Kar-Ra. You are the only man left on Earth. Those men that exist in other star systems are not really your kind anymore. Though their forefathers originated on this planet, they have gone far beyond you in evolution. To them you would be only a senseless curiosity. You are much better off with my people. Our minds are much more like yours. We will take care of you and make you comfortable." But Ned Vince wasn't listening now. "You are the only man left on Earth." That had been enough for him to hear. He didn't more than half believe it. His mind was too confused for conviction about anything. Everything he saw and felt and heard might be some kind of nightmare. But then it might all be real instead, and that was abysmal horror. Ned was no coward. Death and danger of any ordinary earthly kind he could have faced bravely, but the loneliness here and the utter strangeness were hideous, like being stranded alone on another world. His heart was pounding heavily and his eyes were wide. He looked across this eerie room. There was a ramp there at the other side, leading upward instead of a stairway. Fierce impulse to escape this nameless lair, to try to learn the facts for himself, possessed him. He bounded out of the vat, and with head down, dashed for the ramp. He had to go most of the way on his hands and knees, for the upslanting passage was low. Excited animal chucklings around him, and the occasional touch of a furry body, hurried his feverish scrambling. But he emerged at last at the surface. He stood there panting in that frigid, rarefied air. It was night. The moon was a gigantic, pockmarked bulk. The constellations were unrecognizable. The rodent city was a glowing expanse of shallow, crystalline domes set among odd scrub trees and bushes. The crags loomed on all sides, all their jaggedness lost after 1,000,000 years of erosion under an ocean that was gone. In that ghastly moonlight, the ground glistened with dry salt. "Well, I guess it's all true. Huh," Ned Vince muttered in a flat tone. Behind him he heard an excited, squeaky chattering. Rodents in pursuit. Looking back, he saw the pinpoint gleams of countless little eyes. Yes, he might as well be in exile on another planet, so changed had the Earth become. A wave of intolerable homesickness came over him as he sensed the distances of time that had passed. Those inconceivable eons, separating himself from his friends, from Betty, from almost everything that was familiar. He started to run away from those glittering rodent eyes. He sensed death in that cold sea bottom. But what of it? What reason did he have left to live? He'd be only a museum piece here, a thing to be caged and studied. Prison or a madhouse would be far better. He tried to get a hold of his courage, but what was there to inspire it? Nothing. He laughed harshly as he ran, welcoming that bitter, killing cold. Nostalgia had him in its clutch, And there was no answer in this hell world lost beyond the barrier of the years.